without further ado, we're going to hand over to Dr. Anton Shuvakin, who is the head of solution strategy for Google Cloud, and Dave Shackle, the one and only Dave Shackelford, senior instructor at SANS Institute, and they'll be talking through how to build a foundational cloud security strategy inside of Google Cloud.
Hey, Dave is one and the only, and Anton is just, well, Anton, so I guess that counts. I'll take it.
There is
See, I put my
one and
cleanest
only
Google Cloud
Anton.
t-shirt on, so that must count for something.
That's hilarious. All right. Okay, looks like we have slides. Okay, looks like I just got a note. Looks like I am the controller of slides, Anton. Wahaha.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, let's do it. Thanks everybody for being here with us. Super excited about it. So let me see if I can move slides. There we go. All right, there we go. It's me. I'm Dave. That's Anton. It's us. We're here. Let's go ahead and get into this. So Anton, why don't you kick us off, right? Well, you know, you're out there sort of living the life, in Google Cloud and talking to people about all this stuff. And really the theme of what I think you and I are going to be discussing here is just like, you know, all these crazy changes that are happening, but, you know, there's some good, and I think there's some misunderstood, right?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, this is it's kind of I have flashbacks to my Gartner days, right? Because I kind of realized at one point back in the Gartner days that some people show up at my door and said, cloud is so insecure, we can't use it. And they are kind of the cloud deniers. And of course, there were a lot more of them in 2014 compared to today, but they exist. But there's another group that shows up at my door and said, we moved to the cloud, everything's fine. Cloud is so secure, we don't have to do anything. And of course, both groups are, technical term is, I guess, crazy. but the point is that the reality is in the middle. The real interesting challenge is that it's really in the middle in different places for different people. So again, to quote my former employer again, Gartner, cloud is secure, are you using it securely? And that's been the theme for a lot of organizations in recent years, that actually at this point we have plenty of evidence that, I don't want to make jokes about it, but like most cloud providers built really solid foundations. I know about ours, and I know ours are solid, but the point is that foundations may be solid, but when you hand off some activities to a client, to a company using the cloud, then it becomes trickier. Of course, in our presentation, we'll touch on the shared responsibility model. And I have some, I have recently finished a pretty good blog post, as I would say, collecting the problems with shared responsibility, where you hand off a hot potato to a client, to a cloud user, and it's like, here, we have secure foundations, but you deal with the configuring stuff. See you later, bye. And that approach has not really worked well. David's laughing because I think he was that guy who was handed a hot potato a few times by his clients, right? So to me, this is kind of an interesting mesh of things from, yes, at this point, we know foundations and elements are really done really well, but how people use cloud varies dramatically. People make governance decisions, and people make technical decisions on their end of the responsibility model. And occasionally the result is, you know, not amazing. But I feel like we put to rest the question of, are cloud foundations secure? Because in most cases, we can surely answer yes to that.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a good point, because I mean, I remember the first times I was teaching classes about cloud, and I remember actually I sort of joked. I felt like the person, like the only person out there kind of screaming about cloud I mean, this was 2008, 2009,
yes.
2010 kind of time frames. And I remember distinctly that the people that I was talking to, you know, people that would come to class and stuff, I heard a lot of, we're not doing cloud, we're thinking about cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And what I tried to convey was, well, you'll only be thinking about it for a pretty short amount of time, right? You're going to blink and you're going to be there. So you should go ahead and start preparing for all of these changes that are going to be occurring and start really thinking through this stuff. And I don't think a lot of people really took it that seriously. And then next thing you know,
In
here we are,
2008?
where
Yeah, I agree with you, Dave. But this is what, like 3 centuries ago, right? In IT time.
it feels like that. It certainly feels like that. But let's talk threat modeling, right? So we could probably hang out on this slide for probably the next 30
Yes.
minutes if we wanted to.
Yeah.
But let me ask you a question, Anton, because I know you're talking to a lot of different teams and stuff out there, and I'll certainly give my take on this. But I mean, if we just say threat modeling, I think a lot of people have a perception of what that entails and what it looks like. But do you find that a lot of the organizations you're speaking with are actively doing this on a regular or frequent basis, explicitly or deliberately for their cloud properties? Or is it something that they're having to adjust to?
So I want to briefly touch on the term because, again, as some of you know, as probably hopefully most of you know, I'm not an application security person. Sort of when I think of threats, I tend to think in terms of threat assessment, which is kind of the threat intel SecOps term for figuring out what the threats are, and kind of avoid the threat modeling term, which the AppSec people use to kind of think about the application design and stuff. But I think let's leave this discussion for later. The real tricky challenge to me is that when you talk to people, you realize that actually people are not sure what threats matter in the cloud. And that's been a bit of a head scratcher to me because I was like, I'm just not Googling fast enough to find the right report that basically summarizes the real significant cloud threats. Of course, at this point, we have our own threat horizons reports done by Google researchers. The idea is that we've been collecting data on cloud threats, but the consistent view about what threats matter to you in your cloud environment has been kind of missing in many regards. And I've met people who, over drinks would have a fight over cloud is mostly just somebody else's computer, so threats are the same. They just affect cloud systems. And this camp has good evidence. For example, default passwords, easily guessable passwords, a friggin' 1980s threat affecting 2020's environments. Now, and then there's another camp that focuses on, hot cloud native stuff, container escapes, abuse of APIs in different ways. And they say, no. Cloud's completely different. All the threats are different. And these camps can fight it out for hours if given the chance. But to me, this is genuinely a tricky question for many organizations who are in the cloud. We help. Well, we as a cloud provider help. Researchers help. CSA has a list of threats. The Verizon report covers some of the threats. But deep in my heart, I'm still convinced that for a lot of people, what threats they should be concerned in the cloud is still a mystery.
Well, I think that's fair. And truthfully, I think one of the problems around that is, it's changing so fast. Where do you even begin? I think it's easy to just sort of go, hey, go threat model this whole thing. But really, is it that easy? No. I don't think a lot of people honestly are good at threat modeling to begin with, let alone threat modeling for cloud.
On premise, yes, exactly.
Right, exactly. So I think it's important though, because the modality of your entire infrastructure has changed, really, right? The way that it operates, the way that people are building things, the exposure levels, the interoperability factors. I think if you're not doing some threat modeling around your cloud infrastructure, there's a really good chance that you've got some blind spots. I'll throw out another thought too, and I'm curious if you have an opinion on this. One thing I have found is that occasionally, and I know you're probably going to agree with me on this one, there tends to be an adversarial relationship between things like cloud engineering and DevOps and security. This should not be, but it is. And sometimes what I discover is that threat modeling exercises bring everybody together. So you have an opportunity for everyone's participation and input regarding what's built, why it's built the way it's built. And sometimes security teams don't necessarily understand what's running in the cloud and what the technology stack looks like. And sometimes the DevOps and cloud engineering teams don't necessarily know all of the threats that they need to be worried about and why they're important for the organization as a whole. So I think threat modeling sort of gives you that opportunity to lay it out all out on the table and hear other people's opinions and takes. Do you agree with that?
I think there is a step. So as a security professional, I always think of the pessimistic and bad, right? Obviously, but I think there's a stage worse than adversarial, and that's where the stage where the operations, the DevOps side, as you said, basically, or the business side basically goes around and doesn't tell security. So before you can have a fight, you need to be aware that the other side exists. And so to me, there's always the level that's worse. And what's worse than adversarial is unawareness. There's no connection between people doing cloud, quote unquote, and the actual security team. It has happened at some more traditional enterprises where some business unit or somebody else whips out a credit card, buys some cloud, and they just go do stuff because they want to move faster. So to kind of highlight this point, and I think that both this situation and the adversarial situation are resolved when there's a discussion about what are we doing, what are we building, how we are using it for, what do we want in terms of business outcomes, and what are we building, what tech we are using, and what are the threats, what thing can affect it, what are we going to lose if it breaks. And to me, this is exactly right. So of course, I would agree with you. As long as this awareness is built first, and then perhaps there's a brief stage of friction, adversarial relationship, and then hopefully then we move towards maybe not fully integration, as you can see at some more enlightened companies when the security teams and other teams just basically are the same team. But that's correct. I mean, the phase to fix it is to have this discussion.
Yeah, and we actually had a question come in from a participant. And thanks, by the way. We love questions. That's always good. That said,
Yes.
Well, why not just use MITRE ATT&CK? It's sort of got all the pieces and parts. You read our minds, right? So, this is an example. I mean, it's an example, and I actually always sort of caution people: don't treat any of these, sort of attack frameworks or attack models as the be-all end-all.
God-given truth. Yes.
I think it's unimportant model, and I think we can all rally around this and use it as a discussion. But it's changing too, right? So I think this is a good one though. I mean, I'm a big fan of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I like it. I think it helps us to flesh out and think through some of the things that could happen within a cloud environment and why we need to create controls frameworks and models and all of those kinds of things. But at the same time, what I tend to find is that for instance, the DevOps team might not be really aware of this, or they might not be paying that much attention to it. And so it tends to be a very security heavy model that requires a bit of explanation, right?
Yes, correct. I mean, the main awareness is exactly it. Yes, people basically don't know this exists, and I think before we get to the problem, it's incomplete, or it misses some stuff that's cutting edge, or people may not understand it. How about people who are using cloud sometimes are unaware that any of this exists? It's like explaining bicycle to a fish. I mean, there are many, many more steps you need to go through before you get to MITRE ATT&CK. So why don't we just use it? Is a good point. We should just use it, but you should just explain pretty much from the gas cloud to dinosaurs to Earth formation to to the rest of the history, right?
Dave, Anton, I apologize for doing this, but I just wanted to, with a quick housekeeping point, just very briefly ask if it's possible to speak a little bit slower and maybe, if possible, move a little closer to the mic. Just some of the translator folks are having a little bit of a difficult time hearing you. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. No, moving slower is me. I can't move close to the mic because this is my mic. So it's kind of 1 inch from my mouth, but I can speak slower, yes.
And Dave, also you too, please. I think it was for both. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have the ability to change the mic situation either, but I will attempt to speak slower.
And you would keep me honest as well if I run away, right?
Speakers, yeah. Yeah, that's funny. Anton, why don't you give us your thoughts on this? I know you have a lot of things to say about this concept of shared fate in cloud security.
Sure, and I'll share some links. I'm kind of saving some links to drop into the chat that kind of highlight some of the things I'm describing. But to me, the concept of shared fate has been kind of, the Google Cloud is using it a lot, and some people start treating it as a bit of a buzzword, but there's actually a lot of sort of foundational reality behind it, and there are a couple of pieces that we've written to describe it. Now, the whole story started with us looking at shared responsibility model and kind of understanding that in many cases, the shared responsibility model, which is the foundational layer of cloud security, kind of backfires on people. And again, I have a post that I mentioned that has, a couple of dozen of not so horrible, but like pretty nasty examples when in real world, just saying, this is me, cloud provider, this is you, client, I've done my part, go take care of yours, see you. It really kind of doesn't work practically. Like legally, sure. On paper, absolutely. It's in the friggin' PCI compliance documents. So it's very clearly a model that can work. But at the same time, it's very obvious, and to me it's obvious, that in real world, it often just doesn't work. So, and to me, the particular failure mode or like a challenge with that is that in some cases, we have technical and organizational things that are quite complex that cloud provider knows about or can know about. Cloud provider is well resourced to understand them, but they are kind of on the customer side of a traditional thinking of a shared responsibility model. So we started thinking, okay, we can't really do it for you because it is really on your side, but we can sort of link what we do and link the results, the outcomes, and again, the fate to what you do. And the term, as you'd see from a blog post, was stolen from actually IT operations when there's a shared fate between IT and business. And it was kind of the original use of the term was by another Googler, I think in 2016, when it was more about IT and business alignment. That's the history. But in security, what we talk about is that we're kind of linking our outcomes and our fate in that sense to the fate of cloud user. And we'll explain the machinery there, but the idea is that it creates for a sort of evolved or transcended, maybe, like to use a fancy word, shared responsibility model where the cloud provider with all its resources kind of helps out and gets involved on the client side. And then there are some outcomes shared. We also include components of insurance in it so that if you do things right, that insurance can backstop against problems that can occur. So to me, this is a component of shared fate as well.
Yeah, you have to make a commitment, right? But I think it's
Yes.
important to go into that commitment with your eyes wide open and have an understanding of that perspective. I actually find even today in 2022 that some executives and other folks, not necessarily the security practitioners, but others that are involved in strategic elements of cloud deployments don't wholly understand this. So I think it's actually an important point to articulate.
Yes. That's actually in the very beginning of the point. In the very beginning of the post, you see that the classic failure mode is exactly that, just not getting it or not getting what it means, like having selective blindness when they see a diagram in the picture, in the book or on the web page. Okay, IAM, fun topic, right? Password changes, right? That's what we are talking about.
That's all you have to do. Just change your password. Yeah, I will say, so this is coming from my perspective as a practitioner myself and working with lots of clients and speaking with students at SANS as well. This is probably the area that vexes security teams the most. And I think there's this dawning realization in the industry that when you move into the cloud, everything has an identity. Everything. Storage objects have identities. Service accounts have identities. Users, of course, have their own identities. And so it feels like this big sort of, very complex beast that people are trying to tackle. And I've also found myself, and again, I'm sure you've heard this as well, Anton, and seen it, is that it can actually sort of spin out of control very quickly if there's not governance and a strategy planning for all of these facets of IAM that we have listed here, right? Not only things like traditional user management, but access management for services and provisioning those types of things automatically through infrastructure as code and so forth. And if the DevOps team just goes and starts doing it, and the security team isn't involved and somewhat aligned with ensuring that these things are in place, by the time they get there, it feels like a real struggle. But on the flip side, strong identity and access management, oversight and controls can be remarkably effective at sort of minimizing and limiting the types of attacks that are actually possible as well. So it's very much a double-edged sword.
Yes, and as a funny aside, I was giving a presentation the other day about security operations centers and like SOC meets cloud. I have this new kind of teaching normal traditional SOCs about the cloud, and somebody said, Anton, what's one thing to remember? And I thought, oh, there's this stuff, fun stuff, and this fun stuff, and then it's like, and suddenly I had this lightning strike me, and I said, one thing, learn IAM. Because as a security engineer, it is not exciting. I made copious fun of my peer team at Gartner. That was the IAM team because I called them a password change team. Because to me, focused on threats and intelligence and other fun stuff, IAM was about a freaking password changes. Not that exciting. But when you're in the cloud, you kind of have this newfound and frankly huge appreciation for IAM. And everything that it entails, from provisioning and rights and policies and identities and service accounts. And there's so much interesting stuff, so much complexity, so much machinery, so much difference, and so much importance is placed on it. So to me, this is, if you are the more traditional security professional and you are entering the cloud world as a cloud tourist or a cloud immigrant, or you're trying to become a cloud native, yeah, learning IAM is really good advice. And it may sound a little boring in the beginning, but if you're like me, but then you realize that there's a lot of really fascinating machinery. We use ML and AI for some of the IAM activities, and this is just a lot of brain power is going into that, at least here at Google.
Yeah, and I think it has to, because one of the things that I certainly have discovered, seeing all manner of different cloud builds, whether it's the sort of classic lift and shift where people start sometimes, or whether it's wholly cloud native builds and deployments. Very few organizations think, well, we're not going to make use of the cloud native IAM capabilities. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard that. I don't even think it would be possible. Right? So you do have to learn it. And I think you're right. I think a lot of security professionals are sort of being dragged kicking and screaming into the world of identity and access management, whether they like it or not. And I think that's a detrimental thing for the security programs out there, truthfully, because it does cover everything. And my personal thinking here is the more automated you can get your identity and access management programs, not only in the provisioning, but in the pruning and in the assessment and the monitoring and everything that goes with that, the better off you are. I think manual effort fails here. Maybe not at first, yes, but invariably it will.
Yeah, and I'll share a link of some of the examples of things that are done in kind of highly intelligent manner to make it easier. So this is probably the most self-serving kind of a producty link I'm sharing, but it's just kind of highlights how things are done in this area and how there's actually a fair amount of exciting stuff to learn. It is not just about password changes.
Yeah, and you have plenty of things to talk about with your own offerings, obviously. If you're trying to build things in Google Cloud, where do you start? What's the first thing to try to tackle if you're a security professional?
So it's funny that that your third point on this slide is kind of the point I wanted to make as my first. And again, the link I just shared to a chat was exactly that point about the how to do list privilege in a way that actually you can address one of the common kind of attacks. And I don't mean like hack attacks, but more like a kind of a conceptual attacks. And people say, oh, in the cloud, you're just one IAM mistake away from a breach. But the thing is that in the cloud, in the properly architected cloud, IAM mistakes are much harder to make. And actually in a well-architected cloud, you're not one IAM mistake away from a breach. But when people naively approach cloud in a lift and shift manner, and they sort of like don't adjust their mental models, well, yeah, they are kind of one IAM mistake away from a breach. So list privilege the cloudy way is probably the thing where I would start. But I don't have like that much IAM depth. This is what I've heard people say, and this makes sense to me conceptually. So if Dave has his own starting point, that'd be lovely.
Well, I first want to emphasize that these bullet points are not in order. So, yeah, point number 3 does not mean priority number 3 by any means. But I think I would emphasize that any good starting point. Look, when you sign up to build things in the Google Cloud, you're probably going to have some fairly expensive administrative privilege levels from the get-go for those that are starting to build those cloud deployments. I think you really do need to lock those down first. So, I mean, maybe MFA is the first thing that you should be doing, because you got to get that out of the way just so that you're not exposed. But I think it's an arguable point. I mean, where do you start? I think designing a privilege model and strategy is honestly the first place to start. You have to go into this.
That's fair.
With sort of the model around least privilege, and ensuring that everybody understands that, so that they build policy with that in mind. Something like the Google Cloud Policy Analyzer can help assess the whole thing. But if you've got 3,000 policies already in place by the time security teams say, hey, wait a minute, we should probably check this out, you've got a lot of work ahead of you. Right?
Yes. So yeah, you know what? I'll change mine to yours, frankly. You're right. I think this privilege and this privilege and MFA are hugely important, and they're probably very great, like amazingly great example of a second step. You are right. Yes. If you don't have a coherent picture of identities, and as Dave nicely pointed out, the governance model, I don't think you'll succeed with either MFA or least privilege. So yes, I'll switch my vote to yours.
Well, and I think it's important to maybe as a final point here is that, speaking of that and sort of extending it, because you might start off with, say, a single account, but you're not going to stay there. So it's going to expand. You're going to have different business units and different groups and different accounts. And you need the mechanics and the tactical elements and things like the organization policy service to manage all of that. But back to what we just said, if you don't have a strategy sort of informing how you're building it in the first place, it can easily become overly complex. And I think complexity is definitely the enemy of IAM. I think, trying to keep it as streamlined and as, uniform may not be the right word here, but organizations that sort of lose track of it all have a big problem, right? I think we know that.
Yes, and I think that the complexity and kind of the trying to essentially start working on little things without doing the governance model is probably what sinks you. So you're right. It kind of goes back to data security. How exciting! That is legit exciting compared to IAM to me. I'm sorry.
Well, so I would never say that any of this is easy. I think that would be an overstatement. But I think I've made the statement to numerous folks in the past, students and others alike. I personally am of the opinion, and by the way, feel free to disagree with me, and this goes for the audience as well, right? I welcome healthy disagreement. I think data security is actually easier in the cloud than it has traditionally been on premises, myself.
Yes.
Now, Anton, you're probably biased here, but
I am.
What are your thoughts?
Definitely. So I'm biased, but I'm biased in a peculiar way. I think that the answer. I kind of agree with you, of course, that it's actually easier in the cloud, but I also know under what circumstances it's harder. So let me go through to me, what sounds like very obvious points why it's easier. So for example, back in maybe 14, 15 at Gartner, people had this big debate about encrypting hard drives of data center servers. And one of my teammates wrote a blog, or I don't think it was a paper, but a blog that says, I'm sorry, guys, but if you're encrypting server hard drives in your data center, you're wasting a huge amount of money and time and complexity, because ultimately you're protecting it against threat factors that are unlikely to happen. And he had a huge pushback from people who said, no, you have to encrypt it all and all that. But when you're in the cloud, like when you're in Google Cloud specifically, everything's encrypted in storage. It's like kind of a fact. And you can decide who has the keys and how many times and where. But like you're never not encrypted. So some of the data security controls that caused, a fair amount of fighting and debates and discussions and agonizing, hand-wringing and head-scratching are taken care of. They're done. And so in that sense, data encrypted by default. You don't have to do a lot of silly things like hard-coded passwords and code because we have a secret manager. DLP is built in and magically operates on a lot of data. If you put data in BigQuery and it's sensitive, we would wave at you and say, hello, you put sensitive data in here. Did you intend it? So in that sense, a lot of this is not just built in. A lot of this is just automated, integrated, and it just works like magic. Like people expect magic from Google, and I kind of work here, and I expect magic from us. Like this is really the environment does build that to you. So to me, this is a lot of those examples are easier. But when people actually get a shovel, go into their data center and shovel their data center in the cloud with everything they have on premise in the cloud, data security may become harder. When you're trying to do things the on-premise way, but in the cloud, a lot of things are hard, a lot of things are expensive, a lot of things break, a lot of things break in ways that they didn't break on premise. So in that sense, when people say cloud data security is hard, it's so alien, it's just because they're trying to force fit the on-premise land into the cloud. Like, yes, thank you. I was about to do a self-serving speech on that slide, but like even the first point has this. Like, I'm going to make users manually classify all files. And by the way, those files change every 3 milliseconds and they're in petabytes. Huh? How would it ever work? Well, exactly. It won't. So you say, oh, it's so hard. But hey, cloud includes some of them automated scanning and discovery, at least ours does. And so in that sense, magic happens and things are done. But if you're trying to do them the old way, that's hard.
Well, yeah, and I think that's
so. I'm
fair.
very passionate about this. And again, that's just a major source of my excitement, of course.
Well, one of the things, and I've been sort of paying attention to some of the questions that attendees have been sending in. I echo this, by the way. So I hear you, fellow folks out there fighting the fight. DLP really feels like a struggle, and you touched on classification. I still do feel like that is tough. I think partially because of just having to adapt to the mindset, right? The things we did before may not need to be the things we do now. But truthfully, there seems to have been a definitive lack of sort of, just native, easily accessible DLP controls that people feel cover them like they feel like they need to be covered as they're moving progressively more sensitive data types out into their cloud environments. In fact, I've said for a pretty long time, Google Cloud, you guys have really been one of the very few providers that have sort of inherently baked that in. It's not common. Trying to, number one, locate your data, classify your data, and then perform some means of, data loss prevention within the cloud. That one has felt like the biggest struggle, for me at least, coming from my perspective. And it sounds like some of the attendees feel that same way. Yeah. Is this something that is a big priority for the Google team to continually keep enhancing that DLP function? Is that being driven by the industry?
It's kind of being driven by both industry client needs and our own needs, because kind of an origin story of our DLP tech, and it was I guess it's kind of a semi-public at this point, is that it was built by Google for its own use in a particular use case, which I won't disclose. And so the tech was built the way Google built stuff for itself, which means it was like extremely robust and scaling to, millions of instances or whatever other ginormous scale measures we have was kind of assumed, because like otherwise we can't use it unless it scales to our scale. And so DLP tech has been also used for a lot of privacy use cases, like testing whether things can be de-anonymized. So our DLP tech includes some of the components that are very sort of uncommon in commercial DLP. And the reason is not because we're weird. The reason is because we needed them in that way for certain privacy safeguards. And so in that sense, DLP tech is about data discovery and other things that we mentioned, but it also has a lot of the features that are useful for privacy teams and for privacy use cases, for both reducing the personal information, determining if personal information can leak, and many other use cases of that sort. So to me, it's definitely a huge area of priority, but we are also trying to invest into the energy and money and, of course, resources into making it kind of automatic, included, built-in, magical, invisible, whatever term I use, so that it isn't something you need to like buy and deploy and configure, but it's something that just is there. And I'm not going to repeat some of the internal discussions on this, but there are many more exciting kind of automated DLP working in the background use cases that are hugely helpful for both security, compliance, and privacy use cases that would emerge.
Well, and I'll certainly speak for myself and probably for a lot of folks that are out there. DLP is notoriously hard. On-premises DLP is a pain in the you-know-what. I think any way that you can facilitate streamlining it and making it easier. I mean, you know, in a magical world of rainbows and unicorns, if you can just put your data into the cloud and have DLP auto-magically there working for you with minimal setup requirements and so forth, I think, to me, that's actually a driver towards cloud-based data storage and putting your data there, right? I don't think a lot of people have that perception today yet. That's the impression I get, is that
that's you're exactly
maybe
correct. Yes,
down the road. But I'm excited to see where it goes. That's my perspective. I'd like to see it be easier and better because we have regulations and so many other reasons why we need it.
Yes.
Which brings us to the third pillar, and definitely one that I hear constant complaints about in the industry. So, I mean, do we know what we know? Do we know what we don't know? I get this impression that people feel like there's just all this sprawl occurring in the cloud and we have no idea what's going on. I sort of dispute this myself. So I've got a little bit of a contrarian view on this because from my sense, number one, in the cloud, you have the literal equivalent, and certainly coming from your background, Anton, with working with SIM platforms and event management and so forth for so many years. I would always have loved, as an operations practitioner, to be able to walk into the data center, right? Imagine the virtual data center, and flip a switch that says log everything, right? And it doesn't exist, and we know it doesn't exist. But in the cloud, it actually does. And so, of course, there's a downside to that, which is now you're logging everything, and you need to make sense of it all. But you can get all of that data. The second thing that I've always sort of said here, and again, the sort of model I've always thought of this as is, where's the assets, right? What's running in the environment? Right. And there's been this running joke in security for many years that no one really knows all of the inventory of their infrastructure.
Right, and all the jokes about servers in broom closets and devices plugged in at desks, and all this is going back to, I don't know, the 90s, if not the 80s.
Yeah. Right, but that's not true anymore, because everything you run in the cloud is inextricably attached to the cloud fabric, right? The cloud service fabric does know where all of your assets are. So my opinion, and again, I would love to get your take on this, is that I think we haven't really distilled, at least well distilled, how to use these technologies and make them practically work for us in a lot of cases. Again, I think it's an adaptation strategy. Do you agree with that?
I'm probably in the mad, violent agreement with you in this case. And again, just with DataSec, I think it's going to be about. You're absolutely right. It is easier / more comprehensive and more likely to happen. But if you again approach it with like on-premise mind, you may say, "Oh, wait a second. What do you mean I can't scan for resources?" I'd be like, dude, you just call this API and there's a resource list right there. You don't need to scan for resources because there's a microsegmentation and it's blocking your scans. You're being 1990s. Don't scan for resources. Call an API. And we don't have broom closets in the cloud. So if there's no server in the broom closet. If it's in the cloud, the API would show it, and you absolutely don't need to fear that something's forgotten. Well, except for if somebody from your business buys their own cloud, that's a separate story a little bit. But ultimately, they have an API as well. You just need to find them and call their API. But to me, it's the visibility is clearly superior if you're doing things a cloudy way. If you sometimes try to force fit the on-premise way, you have challenges. You say, but where is my X? And the point is that you don't need X. There's Y, and Y just gives you the answer right away. And just because you're looking for X trying to apply it, no, you should look for Y, and Y is the answer. It's sort of instant and correct, and it's not the on-premise answer. It's just different.
To that end, do you see a lot of organizations, sort of struggling to shoehorn that traditional on-premise, SIM model or event monitoring model into the cloud, or are you seeing a shift towards more of the, sort of cloud native, monitoring and event management structures that you just mentioned? I mean, certainly you have tools available, but are people embracing them, or are they still, insisting upon exporting all of the event data out of the cloud in the first place to someplace else and trying to deal with it in the traditional ways?
Frankly, it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag because for some types of data sources, like for logs, it's actually kind of more similar than different. In that sense, you're not really, you collect logs on premise, you analyze them, you store them, you retain them, you do reports, you do detection. You kind of do the same in the cloud. So that part is kind of mostly the same. And that part is, if you go with mostly on-prem ideas, you may encounter larger scale, you may encounter different context. Again, I have a blog on this somewhere, but ultimately you'd be more or less okay. Where you would not be okay is where you would kind of forget. Cloud provider can give you certain visibility approaches that you can't have on premise. Asset APIs, that's one. We detect certain threats from the backplane side. We have this pretty magical component that just kills crypto miners in cloud instances, and it does it from our side. We observe that there's a crypto miner, and we take it out. And it is not using, it's a preventative tech in that sense, but the point is that it doesn't have any equivalent on premise. So to me, visibility in these areas, like say, what cloud provider can observe and report to you, new types of logs, even VPC flow logs type controls, where we can show you logs about what data flows from one part of the cloud to another. These are where the challenges are, because some of them don't have direct equivalents on premise. Event logs are kind of mostly the same, again, except for they refer to different things, and again, they're in objects and not IP addresses and host names. But ultimately, event logging is comparable, but other methods are more exciting and more alien in that sense.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. I will say I get a lot of questions about how to adapt network security strategies. You have the ability to extract packets. You have those VPC flow logs, but I feel like network security in particular struggles. And sometimes it's because, for instance, compliance requirements are written in such a way that, thou shalt have network intrusion detection, but what does that mean? Right? Does this cover that? Are we able to take the traditional models and apply them here? I think that's an area where a lot of organizations feel like they're still lacking.
Yes, and one of the links I posted to the chat, not to the Zoom chat, but to the to Slack, is kind of about how to change mental models, and network security is the one that gets copious attention in there, because people are trying to do network architectures that are similar to on-prem in the cloud, and it actually kind of mostly works out. And it's not, the problem is not that it's bad. The problem is that it's kind of inefficient, and it gives you problems later. So in some areas, if you go the on-premise way, you're just going to hit the wall. In this area, you're not going to hit the wall, but you're going to go in a long meandering path in the woods instead of a straight roadway, which is well paved. So, and it's a cloud native way in this case. So NetSec, I agree. NetSec is kind of the most tricky one. And this is the post. This slide I'm not going to cover in depth, but I'll show some of the highlights. So yes, I agree with you on the NetSec. So
Yeah,
this
I mean,
visual, yeah, go
a
ahead.
lot of things changing. No, I was going to say, you've got a lot of things to sort of, throw out there, but what do you want to highlight, Anton?
So this is the slide created by our CISO, Phil Venables, who is one of the most admired people in the industry. At least I admire him the most in the industry. And he had this idea that there are kind of powerful forces in the cloud that actually make cloud even more secure over time, and it would make cloud clients even more secure. So I posted my final link, number 8, into the Slack, which kind of highlights the details of this. But this is a view, and it's a well-backed by facts view, that actually, even if you do nothing, cloud around you would become more secure in many regards. And there's kind of a virtual circle for improvements and their economies of scale and other reasons that he's highlighting here that actually would make cloud more and more robust for your needs. And to me, this is an interesting bit, because if you have a data center and you let it sit over time, you have unpatched systems, you have other problems. In essence, if you keep the environment stable, it becomes worse security-wise. But if you do nothing, and this is my super trivialization of his amazing ideas, cloud actually would become better around you. And this is a principal major difference that people actually don't think about at all, and they don't even realize that this is going on. So to me, people have contested some of the points about, like, say, simplicity. If you go cloud native way, things are more simple. And if you go the on-premise way in the cloud, things are more complex. But the point is that cloud is going to become better security-wise, whether you want it or not. And that creates kind of this virtuous circle of improvements over time. And yes, it's a very positive view, but hey, we have our cloud. We have a positive view of cloud computing in general. But to me, it is very well grounded in facts. And I very much suggest, if you read one post from all the links I posted, read number 8. And that's the Phil Venables 8 megatrends.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of the things that are being described here, I mean, the cloud migration is happening irrespective of whether, to your point, you want one change to occur or not. It's happening. People are going there. They're going to continue going there. And, the sort of maturity overall, and not in security is a factor there, but it's a lot of other factors too, is going to gradually improve. It's going to get better. It's going to naturally happen. And then I think the question, and it's a subjective question, because every organization has a different risk tolerance and approach and so on. The question then becomes, given the shared fate we just talked about and some of these other types of controls that are available and these 3 major pillars, when is the right time for an organization to fully commit to the cloud? Some organizations already have. Some organizations are just sort of dipping their toe in the water. But I think that there will probably be a tipping point where it's acknowledged in the industry that it's very likely that your security posture and control stack and everything that goes along with that might actually be better across the board, solely by virtue of having gone to the cloud in the first place. I do think, though, that you can also create a dumpster fire in the cloud if you're not paying attention, right?
A cloud scale
So
dumpster fire, frankly. Yes, a cloud scale dumpster fire, not just a dumpster fire.
Dumpster fires as a service. Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
Yeah. So, well, I think we had until 15 minutes after the hour. So, hey, Diana.
Hi, Diana. How are you?
I'm waiting for you. Yeah.
Hey guys, dumpster fire as a service. You heard it here first. So that was great.
Dave, we should probably finish on a positive note. Diana, can you bring some positivity here? Because otherwise it was overall very positive preso, and suddenly we finished on a dumpster fire note. So
it was extremely positive. I mean, I love that it is getting better. There are lots of advancements, and I love this. Security magic, and the words of Marco Chiappelli. Technology is not magical. Is not magic. Wow, is not magic, but it can feel magical. And I think when you get to the economies of scale that we can have for security in the cloud, there's a lot of power if we take advantage of it in the right way. So thank you. Thank you both so much. Thank you, Shaq. Thank you, Anton, and excited to see you back at the panel, Anton.